The morning sun painted the Colorado territory in shades of gold and amber when Jake Morrison first saw them. Two small figures huddled together beneath the old oak tree that marked the edge of his property, their thin arms wrapped around each other, like they were holding the world together, with nothing but hope and determination. Jake pulled his horse to a stop, squinting through the early light. Children didn't just appear on his land. Hell, people didn't appear on his land at all. That's exactly how he'd wanted it for the past 3 years. Ever since he'd bought this remote ranch and built walls around his heart as sturdy as the ones around his property, the twins, he could see now that they were identical. Maybe 8 or 9 years old, pressed closer together as his horse approached. Their clothes were torn and dirty, their faces streaked with tears, and something else that made Jake's chest tighten. Fear, pure, bone-deep fear that no child should ever have to carry. "Please don't hit us," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. "We're already hurt." Jake felt something crack inside his chest, like ice breaking after a long winter. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements gentle and predictable. These children had been hurt before. That much was clear from the way they flinched at his approach. The way they held each other like they were each other's only safety in a dangerous world. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said softly, crouching down to their level. "My name's Jake. What are your names?" The girl lifted her chin with a courage that broke his heart. "I'm Emma," she said, her voice stronger than her brother's, but still trembling. "This is Ethan. We're twins." "I can see that," Jake said with a gentle smile. "You both have the same green eyes. Pretty eyes, like your mama probably has." At the mention of their mother, both children's faces crumpled. Emma's brave facade shattered, and she began to cry in earnest. Ethan pulled her closer, his own tears falling freely now. "Mama's gone," Ethan whispered. "The bad men took her away. Said we were trouble and left us at the mission, but the mission people were mean too. So we ran." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice gentle. "How long have you been running?" 2 days, Emma said through her tears. "We're so hungry, and Ethan's got a fever, but we don't have nowhere else to go." Jake studied the children, taking in their hollow cheeks, their trembling hands, the way Ethan swayed even while sitting. These weren't just scared kids. They were sick, starving, and completely alone in a world that had shown them nothing but cruelty. 3 years ago, Jake Morrison would have walked away. 3 years ago, he'd been a different man, harder, colder, convinced that caring for anyone only led to heartbreak. But something about these children, something about their whispered plea and their brave attempt to protect each other, which passed all his carefully constructed walls. "Well," he said, standing up and dusting off his knees, "I reckon I could use some help around here. You think you two might be interested in staying for a while? I've got a warm house, plenty of food, and a couple of beds that don't get much use." The twins looked at each other, hope and disbelief warring in their young faces. "You mean it?" Emma asked. "You'd really let us stay?" "I mean it," Jake said. "But I've got one rule. No more talk about being hurt or hit. In my house, children are safe. Always." For the first time since he'd found them, the twins smiled. Chapter 2. Echoes of the past 3 weeks later. Jake was beginning to remember what it felt like to have a family. The twins had settled into his house like they'd always belonged there. Their laughter filling rooms that had been silent for too long. Emma helped with the cooking, her small hands surprisingly capable, while Ethan followed Jake around the ranch, asking endless questions about horses and cattle and the wide expanse of prairie that stretched beyond their home. But even as the children began to heal, Jake found himself wrestling with ghosts he'd thought he'd buried for good. It was while watching Emma braid wildflowers into a crown that the memories hit him hardest. The way she tilted her head, the gentle curve of her smile, it all reminded him of Sarah, his Sarah who'd worn wildflowers in her auburn hair on their wedding day. Sarah, who'd died giving birth to their stillborn son, while Jake was away fighting in a war that seemed meaningless now. Jake. Ethan's voice pulled him from his reverie. "You look sad. Are you thinking about someone who went away too?" mouths of babes. Jake knelt down beside the boy, marveling at how perceptive children could be. "I am thinking about someone," he admitted. "Someone I loved very much, but who I can't see anymore." "Is she with the angels?" Emma asked, joining them with her flower crown perched on her dark hair. "She's with the angels." Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised him by wrapping her thin arms around his neck. "That's okay," she whispered. "You can love us instead. We won't go away." Jake's throat tightened with emotion. These children, who had every reason to be bitter and closed off, were offering him the one thing he thought he'd lost forever: unconditional love. But even as he held them close, a nagging worry ate at him. The twins' mother was still out there somewhere, possibly looking for them. And Jake knew that sooner or later his temporary happiness would have to face the harsh realities of the world beyond his ranch. That reality arrived on a Tuesday, this morning, in the form of Sheriff Tom Bradley, an old friend who'd served with Jake during the war. As Tom rode up to the house with his hat pulled low and his expression grim. "Jake," he said, dismounting slowly, "we need to talk." Jake felt the twins press closer to him from where they stood on the porch. "What's this about, Tom?" "It's about the children," Tom said quietly. "Their mother, Catherine Walsh's been looking for them. She's alive, Jake, and she wants them back." Jake's heart stopped. Beside him, he heard Emma's sharp intake of breath, felt Ethan grab his hand with desperate fingers. "She's alive," Emma whispered, her voice full of hope and confusion. Tom's expression softened as he looked at the children. "Yes, little one, your mama's alive. She escaped from the men who took her, and she's been searching for you ever since." "Then why?" Ethan started, then stopped, looking up at Jake with eyes full of uncertainty. "Why did she leave us?" Emma finished for him. Tom glanced at Jake, a silent communication passing between the two men. There was more to this story, Jake realized. Something Tom couldn't or wouldn't say in front of the children. "She didn't leave you by choice," Tom said gently. "But she's coming here tomorrow to take you home." Jake felt his world tilt on its axis. Home. The twins had a home, and it wasn't with him. Of course it wasn't with him. It was just a broken-down cowboy who'd found them by accident. Not their father, not their family. But as he looked down at Emma and Ethan, saw the fear creeping back into their faces, Jake realized something that shook him to his core. These children had become his family, and the thought of losing them felt like losing Sarah and his unborn son all over again. "Will you stay for supper?" Jake asked Tom, his voice carefully controlled. The children should hear about their mother from someone they trust. Tom nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in Jake's words. This was goodbye, and they all knew it. That night, after Tom had left and the twins were finally asleep, Jake sat on his porch and stared up at the stars. For 3 weeks, he'd allowed himself to dream of a different future where he was a father, where his house was full of love and laughter, where the ghosts of his past could rest in peace. Tomorrow, that dream would end. But even as his heart ached with impending loss, Jake found himself grateful. These children had given him something precious. They'd reminded him that his heart was still capable of love, that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to spend the rest of his life alone. Chapter 3. A mother's return. Catherine Walsh arrived at sunrise. Just as Jake was finishing the morning chores, she rode alone, her horse moving at a careful pace that spoke of long hours in the saddle and a body that hadn't fully healed from whatever ordeal she'd endured. Jake's first thought was that the twins had gotten their beauty from their mother, even exhausted and worn from her journey. Catherine Walsh was lovely in the way wildflowers were lovely, natural and unadorned, but somehow perfect in her simplicity. Her auburn hair, so like Emma's, was pulled back in a practical bun, and her green eyes held depths of sorrow that Jake recognized all too well. But it was the expression on her face that stopped him cold. Instead of joy at being reunited with her children, Catherine looked terrified. Her hands shook as she dismounted, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow her. "Mr. Morrison?" she asked, her voice barely above. A whisper, Yes, ma'am. You must be Catherine. She nodded, then seemed to gather her courage. Are they... Are Emma and Ethan all right? Please tell me they're all right. They're fine, Jake assured her quickly. A little thin when I found them. Jake studied her carefully, taking in the way she held herself, the carefully controlled fear in her eyes. This wasn't just a mother worried about her children. This was a woman running from something or someone. Mrs. Walsh, he said gently. Why don't you come inside? The children will be waking soon, and I think there are some things we need to discuss. Catherine followed him into the house, her eyes taking in everything: the clean floors, the warm kitchen, the small touches that spoke of children being loved and cared for. You've been kind to them, she said, and Jake heard the surprise in her voice. They're good children, Jake replied. They've been no trouble at all. Catherine sat down at his kitchen table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. Morrison, I need you to know, I didn't abandon them. I would never abandon my children. I know, Jake said quietly. Tom Bradley told me some of what happened. Men took you. Catherine's face went white. My husband, she said, her voice barely audible. My late husband's business partners. They claimed I owed them money from his debts, but I knew they wanted more than money. When I refused them, they... She stopped, shaking her head. They locked me up, said the children were worthless, and dumped them at the mission. It took me weeks to escape, and when I got to the mission, they were gone. Jake felt a familiar rage building in his chest. The same rage he'd felt during the war, when he'd seen innocents hurt by men who should have protected them. Where are these men now? Still looking for me, Catherine said, fear creeping back into her voice. They won't give up. They never give up. She looked up at Jake with desperate eyes. I can't put the children in danger again, but I can't leave them either. I don't know what to do. Before Jake could respond, he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, rubbing her eyes. She looked at Catherine for a long moment, as if trying to make sure she was real. Mama? She, whispered. Catherine stood so quickly her chair fell over. Emma, baby girl. Emma ran into her mother's arms, and Catherine held her so tightly, it was as if she was trying to merge their two bodies into one. Ethan appeared a moment later, moving more slowly, his face showing the same careful hope Jake had seen that first morning. You came back, Ethan said simply. I never left, Catherine said fiercely, reaching out to pull him into the embrace as well. I never chose to leave you, not ever. Jake watched the reunion with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. This was how it should be: children with their mother, a family reunited. But even as he told himself this, he couldn't ignore the fear in Catherine's eyes, or the way she kept glancing toward the windows. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of horses approaching fast. Too many horses. Catherine went rigid, her face draining of all color. They found me, she whispered. Oh God, they found me. Jake was at the window in 3 quick strides, looking out at the group of men surrounding his house. 5 of them. All armed, all with the hard look of men who enjoyed causing pain. Their leader, a man with silver hair and cruel eyes, sat his horse like he owned the world. Catherine, the man called out, we know you're in there. Come out, and we'll let the cowboy and the children live. Jake looked back at Catherine, who was holding her twins so tightly they could barely breathe. Her face was the color of ash, but her jaw was set with determination. I have to go with them, she said quietly. It's the only way to keep you and the children safe. Like hell, Jake said, moving to the gun cabinet in the corner of the room. Mr. Morrison, please, Catherine begged. Don't understand what these men are capable of. Jake pulled out his rifle and began loading it with calm, practiced movements. Ma'am, you don't understand what I'm capable of. Chapter 4. Stand at the ranch, stay away from the windows, Jake instructed, his voice calm despite the dangers surrounding them. He'd been in worse situations during the war, though never with children and a woman to protect. Catherine is there. Somewhere in the house where you and the twins can hide? Catherine shook her head, her arms still wrapped protectively around Emma and Ethan.
Oh.
They'll tear the house apart looking for us. And if they don't find me... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. These men would hurt anyone they found in their search. "Jake," Emma whispered, tugging at his shirt. "Are you going to fight them?" Jake knelt down to her level, his hands gentle on her small shoulders. "Sometimes, sweetheart, fighting is the only way to protect the people you love." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jake realized what he'd just admitted, not just to Emma, but to himself. He loved these children. He loved their mother, this brave woman who'd risked everything to find them. In the space of 3 weeks, they'd become his family, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take them away. "Catherine," the voice outside called again, more impatient. "Now, you're trying my patience, woman. Come out now, or we start shooting up this nice little house." Jake moved to the front window, staying low. The 5 men had spread out, covering all approaches to the house. Their leader, the silver-haired man Catherine, clearly sat his horse with arrogant confidence. "You boys are on private property," Jake called out. "I suggest you turn around and ride away." The leader laughed, a cold sound that made Jake's skin crawl. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy. We just want what belongs to us." "Nothing here belongs to you," Jake replied, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in battle. "The woman does," the man said. "She owes us a debt, and we've come to collect." Jake felt Catherine move up beside him, staying low, but close enough to whisper. "His name is Marcus Dalton," she said. "He was my husband's partner in a freight business. When Robert died, Marcus claimed I inherited Robert's debts, but it was a lie. He wanted to force me into other arrangements." Jake's jaw clenched. He'd known men like Marcus Dalton during the war, men who saw other people as property to be used and discarded. "How much is he claiming you?" $5,000, Catherine whispered. "Money I don't have." Jake was quiet for a moment, calculating. $5,000 was more than most people saw in a lifetime, but Jake had done well for himself. The railroad had paid good money for his horses, and he'd been careful with his savings. "Mr. Morrison," Catherine continued, "I want you to know, whatever happens, thank you for taking care of Emma and Ethan. You've been kinder to us than we had any right to expect." "Catherine," Jake said quietly, not taking his eyes off the men outside. "Do you trust me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I don't know why, but yes, and trust me now." Jake stood up, his rifle held loose and ready. "Dalton," he called out, "I want to make you a deal." The silver-haired man urged his horse a few steps closer to the house. "I'm listening, cowboy." "The woman says she owes you $5,000. I'll pay her debt." Catherine gasped beside him, but Jake held up a hand to silence her. "Interesting," Dalton said. "You got that kind of money, cowboy?" "I do," Jake replied. "In return, you take the money and leave these people alone, forever. No more hunting, no more threats. You disappear from their lives like you never existed." Dalton was quiet for a moment, considering. "What's your interest in this woman, cowboy? She your whore?" Jake's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle, but he forced himself to remain calm. "She's my wife," he said clearly, "and those are my children. Touch any of them, and I'll kill you where you stand." Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible, but she didn't contradict him. Behind them, Jake heard Emma whisper to Ethan, "Does that make Jake our papa now?" Dalton laughed again. "Your wife, is she?" "Funny. She was Robert Walsh's wife last time I checked." "Robert Walsh is dead," Jake said. "Catherine is free to marry who she chooses." "Well, well," Dalton said. "This is an interesting development, but here's the thing, cowboy. I don't just want the money anymore. This woman humiliated me when she escaped, shot one of my men in the process. That requires a different kind of payment." Jake felt his blood run cold. "What are you saying, Dalton?" "I'm saying the deal's changed. I want the money, and I want one night with your wife. Then we'll call it even." The silence that followed was deadly. Jake could feel the rage building in his chest, white-hot and dangerous. But more than that, he could feel Catherine trembling beside him, could hear Emma and Ethan's frightened breathing behind them. "Counteroffer," Jake said. his voice deadly quiet. You turn around and ride away now, and I let you live. Dalton's laughter was cut short by the crack of Jake's rifle. The man's hat flew off his head, and his horse reared in surprise. Shot won't be a warning, Jake called out. The other 4 men had drawn their weapons, but they were in the open while Jake had the cover of the house. Jake had learned a thing or two about tactics during the war. He just made a big mistake. Cowboy, Dalton snarled, drawing his own pistol. No, Jake said, working the lever on his rifle. You made the mistake when you threatened my family. The fight that followed was brief but intense. Jake's war experience served him well. He knew how to use cover, how to make every shot count. One of Dalton's men went down in the first exchange. Of gunfire, another fled when he realized he was outmatched. But Dalton himself was no coward. He dismounted and advanced on the house, using his horse as cover, his remaining men flanking him. Jake knew he couldn't hold them all off indefinitely, not with Catherine and the children in the house. That's when he heard horses approaching from the east. A lot of horses. Sheriff Tom Bradley rode into the yard with 6 deputies surrounding. The remaining gunmen, before they knew what was happening, "Drop your weapons," Tom shouted, his own rifle trained on Dalton. "You're all under arrest." The fight went out of Dalton's men immediately. They were hired guns, not soldiers. Without the advantage of numbers, they had no stomach for a real fight. But Dalton himself wasn't finished. As Tom's deputies moved to arrest him, he spun toward the house, his pistol raised. "If I can't have her," he snarled, "nobody can." Jake's rifle cracked one more time. Marcus Dalton fell backward into the dirt and lay still. Chapter 5. Anew. Beginning, the afternoon sun was setting by the time Sheriff Bradley and his men finished their business and rode away, taking the surviving gunman to face justice. Jake sat on his porch steps, watching Catherine tend to a small cut on Ethan's arm where he'd scraped it during the excitement. The danger was over, but Jake felt strangely empty. Now that the immediate threat was gone, Catherine had no reason to stay. She could take the children anywhere, start fresh without the burden of a broken-down cowboy who'd somehow gotten mixed up in her troubles. Jake. Emma's voice pulled him from his brooding. She stood in front of him, her green eyes serious. "Are you really our papa now?" Jake's heart clenched. "That's up to your mama, sweetheart." Emma nodded solemnly, then walked over to where Catherine was bandaging Ethan's arm. Jake watched as she whispered something in her mother's ear. Something that made Catherine's cheeks flush pink. Catherine finished with Ethan's bandage, then sent both children inside to wash up for supper. When they were alone, she came and sat beside Jake on the porch steps. "You told Dalton I was your wife," she said quietly. "It was the only way I could think of to protect you and the children," Jake replied. "I hope you don't take offense." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the prairie. "Emma asked me if it was true," she said finally. Jake's heart stopped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her," Catherine said, turning to look at him with those remarkable green eyes, "that marriage is about more than just words. It's about choosing to love someone every day, choosing to stand by them no matter what comes. It's about building a life together, creating a family." Jake felt his breath catch. "Catherine, you saved us," she continued. "Not just today, but every day for the past 3 weeks. You gave my children a home when they had nowhere to go. You gave them safety and love and the chance to be children again." She paused, her voice growing softer. "You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost everything." Jake wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and never let her go. He forced himself to remain still. "You don't owe me anything, Catherine. You're free now. You and the children can go anywhere, do anything." "What if I don't want to go anywhere?" she asked. "What if I want to stay here with you?" Jake turned to look at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Catherine, you barely know me." "I know enough," she said firmly. "I know you're kind to children who aren't your own. I know you're brave enough to fight for people you care about. I know you make Emma laugh, and you let Ethan follow you around, asking a million questions. Without ever getting impatient," she smiled, and Jake felt his heart skip. I know that when you look at me, I feel beautiful for the first time in years. You are beautiful, Jake said hoarsely. Beautiful and strong and everything I never thought I deserved. Catherine reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Maybe we both deserve a second chance, she said softly. Before Jake could respond, the porch door burst open and Emma and Ethan tumbled out, clean and eager for supper. Mama, Emma said, settling herself between her mother and Jake, Ethan, and Dade. I were talking, and we decided we wanted to stay here. This feels like home. Ethan nodded seriously. Can we stay, Mama? Please. Catherine looked at her children, then at Jake, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I think she said carefully, that would depend on whether Jake wants us to stay. Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. 3 weeks ago, he'd been alone, convinced that he was destined to live out his days in solitude. He was surrounded by the family he'd never dared to dream of having. I can't think of anything I want more, he said honestly. Emma clapped, her hands together in delight. Does this mean you're really going to be our papa? Jake looked at Catherine, a silent question in his eyes. She squeezed his hand gently, her answer clear in her smile. Yes, sweetheart, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. If your mama will have me, I'd be honored to be your papa.
Aight.
Then launched himself at Jake, wrapping his thin arms around the man who'd become his hero. I love you, Papa Jake, he whispered. Emma joined the embrace, and finally Catherine, until all 4 of them were tangled together on the porch steps, holding each other as the sun set over the Colorado territory. Epilogue. 6 months later, the wedding was small. Just the 4 of them. Sheriff Tom Bradley to perform the ceremony, and Mrs. Henderson from town to serve as witness. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Jake had borrowed a proper suit from Tom. But it was Emma and Ethan who stole the show.
Oh.
Emma had woven wildflowers into a crown for her mother, while Ethan stood proudly beside Jake, holding the simple gold ring they'd picked out together in town. Do you, Jake Morrison, take Catherine Walsh to be your lawfully wedded wife? Tom asked, trying to keep the grin off his face. I do, Jake said, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. Do you, Catherine Walsh, take Jake Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Catherine whispered, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Tom paused, winking at the children. Jake, you may kiss your bride. Jake cupped Catherine's face in his hands and kissed her softly, sweetly, while Emma and Ethan cheered and Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. Later that evening, after Mrs. Henderson had gone home and the children were asleep, Jake and Catherine sat on their porch swing, watching the stars come. Out over the prairie, any regrets? Jake asked, his arm around his new wife's shoulders. Catherine snuggled closer to him, her head resting on his chest. Only one, she said. Jake's heart skipped. What's that? Regret that we didn't meet sooner, she said softly. Think of all the lonely nights we could have avoided. Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of wildflowers in her hair. We found each other when we were supposed to, he said. Everything that happened before brought us to this moment. Catherine tilted her head to look. At him, love shining in her green eyes. I used to think the prairie was empty, she said. All that space, all that silence. But now I understand it's not empty at all. It's full of possibilities. Jake pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. 6 months ago, 2 frightened children had whispered, Please don't hit us, we're already hurt. And in that moment, his life had changed forever. They'd all been hurt, all been broken in their own ways. But somehow, together, they'd found healing. I love you, Mrs. Morrison, he whispered against her hair. I love you too, she whispered. Back. All of us do. From inside the house came the soft sound of children's laughter, and Jake smiled. His house was no longer silent, no longer empty. It was full of the sounds of family, the warmth of love, and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. Under the endless western sky, Jake Morrison had found his redemption, and it tasted sweeter than he'd ever dared to imagine.